Okie doke.
All right. So thank everybody for coming to the EPAC community conversation tonight. Our guest speaker is Paul Owens, who is the president of 1,000 Friends of Florida, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to sustainable development. And prior to being the president of 1,000 Friends of Florida, Paul was the editorial writer and then the opinions editor at the Orlando Sentinel, where he wrote extensively on growth management, environment, and quality of life issues facing Florida. He also served as the Sentinel's Florida Forward moderator, where he organized and moderated public forums on topics including transportation and affordable housing. He has a master's degree in journalism from Stanford University and a bachelor's degree in history with honors from Swarthmore College. And the title of his talk this evening is A Better Future for Florida. And Paul's going to take us through what kind of Florida we could expect by 2070, depending on the policy decisions and development choices that we make today. After Paul's presentation, we'll have time for questions. So if you think of anything that you'd like to ask, you can wait until the end of the presentation, or you can just pop those questions into the chat box, and we'll be taking a look at that at the end of the talk. Paul, was there anything that you'd like to add before you get started?
No, just a couple of technical things. Since I am going to be sharing my screen, I'll need to have sharing privileges, but I also, when I attempted to record, was told that I needed to get the host to give me permission to record. So I may need permission from whoever the host is to both to record and to share the screen.
Okay, I think we're good to go, Paul. I think we don't have any problems now, so.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go to my shared screen then. And okay. Now, how does that look to everybody? Whoops. Okay, I'm going to try to see if I can get a full screen on that so you don't see partial. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to see if. Okay. I'm going to try this again. Sorry, folks. There we go again. Try one more time. All right, I'm at a loss. I would like to have this at the full. I would like to have this full screen, but I'm not sure how to make it do that. So I think we'll just have to stick with the partial screen here. I apologize for that, but I'm going to get started. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to address the Alachua County's Environmental Policy Advisory Committee and to talk about how we can all work together to get to a better future for Florida. And I appreciate EPAC's commitment to citizen involvement on environmental issues to safeguarding our air and our water, and to responsibly managing public lands and resources. We share all those goals at 1,000 Friends of Florida. You're definitely singing our song. So in case you're not familiar with 1,000 Friends, we're Florida's leading nonprofit advocate of sustainable development. Since our founding in 1986, we have been partnering with citizens, community and state leaders, conservation and business groups, and others to build more sustainable communities while we save special places throughout Florida. We oppose low-density, sprawling development that depletes natural and agricultural land, and we're committed to empowering citizens to engage successfully in the community planning process. We've been around for 35 years, but our work remains crucial. And the question, of course, is why? The short answer is because of growth. Florida's population increased by more than 1,000 people a day from April 2019 to April 2020. And the latest official figures for growth since then aren't available yet, but many reports suggest growth has held steady or even accelerated over since the pandemic struck us in the spring of 2020. It's not hard to understand why. If you live in another more expensive part of the country, say the Northeast, and you want a bigger, more affordable house that can accommodate a home office or two, and you want the option of spending safer time outdoors year round, Florida is a great place to relocate. So where do all these people go? A few years ago, and in preparing our Florida 2070 report with our partners at the University of Florida, we found that Florida was losing 10 acres of land to development every single hour. To give you an idea of how much that is, here's a spot that should be familiar to most of the folks tuned in tonight. The University of Florida's football field, the swamp. That's about 1.5 acres. So imagine losing more than 7 football fields, more than 7 swamps every hour to development. That's what's been going on in Florida. And what happens when we lose all our natural land? All of that natural land, lose everything good that comes with it. Aquifer recharge, the purifying process that occurs as water is absorbed by natural land, the buffers that natural land creates to protect adjacent waterways, the flood control from water naturally absorbed, the carbon storage provided by natural land, the wildlife habitat, the land that is used for farming, and the recreational opportunities like bird watching or hiking or mountain biking. When our growth is poorly managed, the stress is evident in clogged highways. Low density, sprawling developments don't lend themselves to walking, biking, public transit, or any other alternatives to cars and trucks. We can see the stress in our waterways fouled with algae, fed by polluted runoff from development that is no longer cleansed, buffered, and absorbed by natural land. I like to include this photo because people assume the man is wearing a mask to protect himself from COVID-19. In fact, this photo predates the pandemic by 2 years. The man in it was protecting himself from the harmful fumes from blue-green algae in the toxic summer of 2018. That summer was an environmental and public health disaster, but also an economic nightmare because tourists stayed away from many coastal areas and businesses like hotels and restaurants suffered for it. This past summer wasn't as bad as that one, but there were plenty of algal blooms reported in waterways throughout the state. Some waterways are still dealing with blooms right now. It's not hard to connect the dots between water problems like these and poor growth management. The typical result of poor growth management is sprawl, which consumes open land critical for the health of our waterways. Sprawl adds to the runoff that pollutes our waterways, feeds algal blooms, and prolongs red tide. It increases the demand for water, which decreases the flow in our waterways and makes them more vulnerable to nutrient pollution. So to review, sprawl is bad because it exacerbates water pollution. By consuming open land, it destroys wildlife habitat. It worsens traffic congestion. It strains other public services and adds to the taxpayer burden of paying for them. It degrades our quality of life and lowers our property values in the process. At 1,000 Friends of Florida, we believe in managing our state's growth to promote vibrant, walkable places to live, work, study, and play with affordable housing and transportation options. Through good planning, it's actually possible to enhance our quality of life as we grow. We also believe in steering development away from Florida's natural lands to protect and preserve our state's environment, its waterways and underground water supply, its fish and wildlife, its agricultural economy and heritage, its abundant recreational opportunities, and its rich and varied plant life. So here's a riddle. What would we be in Florida without our environment? We'd be a hot, dirty, crowded, charmless place, an asphalt jungle pockmarked with gas stations and strip malls. At 1,000 Friends, we're not against growth, we're against poorly managed, out of control growth that degrades our environment, our economy, and our quality of life. Poorly managed, out of control growth is bad for family and business budgets and the state's economy. That's because public services that are stretched to reach sprawling development are less efficient and more expensive, leading to higher taxes. Families struggle with higher taxes and businesses are less competitive. That's bad for Florida's economy. And that's one of the reasons why we think growth management should be a bipartisan priority. 1,000 Friends of Florida was co-founded in 1986 by Nathaniel Reed, one of the best known environmental champions in Florida and throughout the nation, and John DeGrove, who has been called the father of growth management in Florida. If you're not familiar with Nat, who's the gentleman on the left in this slide, he advised 2 presidents and 6 Florida governors from both parties. He played a leading role in some of the most important federal and state environmental initiatives of the past half century. That includes at the federal level, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, and the banning of DDT. On the state level, it includes stopping the Everglades Jetport and the Cross Florida Barge Canal, and helping to establish Preservation 2000 in Florida Forever to protect millions of acres of land from development. At 1,000 Friends, we pursue our goals of building better communities and saving special places at both the state and local levels. We do it through engagement with leaders, legal advocacy, and public education. We work directly with citizens who contact us for information and expertise. We reach out to the public through our website, social media, webinars, and workshops. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our webinars, normally offered once a month from September through May, reach thousands of people a year. We just did one today on coastal resilience initiatives, and more than 500 people tuned in. And we do archive those on our website. Finally, we partner with other groups and publish reports on the positive impact of good planning and environmental protection. And we're happy to talk about it when we're invited. Above all, we empower Floridians who seek a meaningful role in shaping a more sustainable future for their communities and state. We arm them with information. We partner with them, and we represent them on issues with statewide impact in county commission chambers, city council chambers, courthouses, and the state capitol. We work with citizens throughout the state. Remember the reports I mentioned when I was talking about 1,000 Friends public education efforts. In 2016, we produced 2 reports with the University of Florida GeoPlan Center and the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The overview for those reports, Florida 2070 and Water 2070, poses a short but profoundly important question on its cover. What is your vision for Florida's future? Or to put it another way, what kind of state do you want to leave for future generations? The reports project Florida's population is on pace to grow to almost 34 million people by 2070. That's a huge jump from fewer than 19 million in the 2010 census and 21.5 million people in the 2020 census. The reports undertook 2 GIS mapping studies to determine the impacts of Florida's, of this projected population growth on Florida's lands and waters. Each study includes 3 scenarios: the 2010 baseline based on actual data from that year, the 2070 trend if current development trends continue, and the 2070 alternative reflecting the benefits of greater sustainability in planning and growth. This slide shows 3 scenarios for land use in the state, with the 2010 baseline on the left, the 2070 trend in the middle, and the 2070 alternative on the right. The red in the map corresponds to developed land, the green to protected land, and the beige to undeveloped but unprotected land. The trend map in the middle shows what happens if Florida absorbs the projected population increase while maintaining its current population density or development density, and without protecting more land from development. The alternative on the right shows what happens if Florida develops at a higher density, a modest 20%, and protects all of the land prioritized under the Florida Forever program and all of the land identified as part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. These 3 pie charts may make the difference between the 3 scenarios a little easier to understand. If Florida maintains its current pattern of growth and development, more than 1/3 of our state will be paved over by 2070, up from less than 1/5 now, or less than 1/5 in 2010. Millions of acres of agricultural and natural lands essential to maintaining our quality of life, our water supply, many of our jobs, and more will be lost forever But if we increase our development density by an average of 20% and protect high priority conservation land, Florida will save millions of acres of conservation land and maintain millions of acres of agricultural land. Now on to water demand. In these maps, the darker colors correspond to greater water consumption. The three scenarios show the baseline in 2010, the 2070 trend if we continue the development status quo, and the 2070 alternative if we develop at a 20% higher density and reduce our water consumption by a modest 20%. This bar graph makes the difference in the maps easier to appreciate, perhaps. In the middle bar, the 2070 trend, water use related to development is projected to more than double. That's an unsustainable prospect. The alternative on the right shows that development-related water demand can be reduced by more than a quarter from the trend through more compact development and water conservation from users of 20%. Again, a pretty modest goal. So to sum up, if Florida is smarter about its growth over the next 50 years than the way we've suggested, 1.9 million fewer acres will be developed, 5.8 million more acres of natural and agricultural land will be protected, and billions of gallons of water will be conserved every single day. Our Florida 2070 and Water 2070 reports also looked at 4 regions in the state, including Alachua and 17 other counties in Northeast Florida. For this region, Bieber projected a population increase from 2010 to 2070 of 85%. Here are the maps and pie charts showing the projected impact of that projected population increase on land use in the region. And you can see that Alachua County is sort of down in the middle of the southern part of this regional map. You can see from the red portions of the maps and charts that development would increase substantially under the 2070 trend, but not quite as much under the 2070 alternative that assumes development at a 20% higher density and a concerted effort to protect conservation land. Here are the maps from water use, for water use. The 2070 trend shows darker colors for increased consumption, especially around Gainesville and Jacksonville. In the 2070 alternative, there isn't quite as much darkness on the map. But here's the bottom line and what's to be gained for your region from smarter growth. More than 350,000 fewer acres developed, 1.4 million additional acres of natural and agricultural land preserved, and 260 million gallons of water conserved every day. The 2070 reports projected Alachua County's population would increase by 51% between 2010 and 2070. The University of Florida did not extrapolate the impact of this increase on land use and water demand in Alachua County specifically for us. They've done that for us in some other counties, but it takes time and money. However, it's a safe bet that with a 51% increase, Alachua County stands to lose significant land to development and experience a large increase in water demand unless the county takes the steps we've all outlined in the alternative scenario, developing in a more compact fashion, protecting more conservation land, and saving more water. If you get a chance to look again at the regional maps, you can see the difference in Alachua County between the trend and alternative scenarios. To review, there are multiple benefits from compact development: less negative impact on the environment, reduced costs for public services, more alternatives to cars for transportation and less time stuck in traffic, and more choices for housing. I've done a lot of presentations throughout Florida, and no matter where I go, I like to leave folks with this point. The cumulative impact of multiple small land use changes will, over time, shape the future landscape of Florida. There are no unimportant land use changes. Now, while I have the floor, I'm going to go through some of the key milestones in the history of growth management in Florida. I'll begin in 1972 when the State Comprehensive Planning Act was passed under Governor Reuben Askew, creating a state division of planning and requiring the creation of a state growth plan. 3 years later, the legislature passed a law requiring counties and cities to adopt local comprehensive plans by 1979. In 1985, the legislature passed the Growth Management Act, the most important law yet. It required local comprehensive plans to be consistent with regional and state plans and established a process for the state to approve local plans and amendments. It created formal state administrative hearings for challenges and sanctions for noncompliance. It enhanced citizen standing to file challenges. A year later, John DeGrove and Nat Reed co-founded 1,000 Friends to serve as a watchdog for that 1985 law. Over the next couple of decades, changes were made to the law, but its planning objectives largely survived. During this time, there were some other complementary laws passed, including programs to protect land and expand affordable housing. But in what I call the great unraveling for growth management in 2011, legislators and Governor Rick Scott abolished the Department of Community Affairs, the state's growth management agency, and relegated its functions to a downsized office in the new Department of Economic Opportunity. They significantly curtailed state and regional authority over planning and land development. They made it harder for citizens to engage in the planning process. They let local governments put the cost burden for growth on general taxpayers rather than on developers. They took control over water management, district budgets, and weakened water protections, and they removed requirements that local comprehensive plans address energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions. Things actually got worse in 2019 when the legislature approved a late amendment to a bill that further weakened growth management. Under that amendment, which was approved without any scrutiny in committee or any debate from legislators, citizens who challenge a development order as inconsistent with their local comprehensive plan and lose have to pay the legal costs of the winners. So let me explain why this was such a setback to growth management. Comprehensive plans normally have elements intended to protect a community's environment and quality of life from the impacts of development. Local governments are required to make development decisions that are consistent with their comp plans, but that requirement is not enforced by the state. So the only way to enforce consistency between development orders and comp plans is through these citizen challenges. Citizens and groups like ours have used them to stop incompatible development. But since that amendment became law, the risk for citizens of having to pay the legal costs of the winners if they lose has all but shut down consistency challenges and ended comp plan enforcement. If this amendment had received normal scrutiny from legislators, their staff, and from witnesses, it might have been stopped. I know we would have testified against it. Supporters of the amendment have said it was need to stop frivolous challenges that can delay or kill development. But state law already allows judges to order losers in frivolous cases to pay the legal costs of the winners. So the only victims of this amendment are citizens with legitimate concerns about development orders. And with growth continuing to surge in Florida, the amendment couldn't have come along at a worse time. 1000 Friends has been fighting back ever since this amendment was passed. We filed a lawsuit challenging it as an unconstitutional violation of the due process rights guaranteed to Floridians under our state constitution. Our suit is currently on appeal before the First District Court of Appeal in Tallahassee. Our lawyer delivered oral arguments before the court in June. Meanwhile, we've been trying to persuade legislators to fix their mistake, an outcome we'd actually prefer to an extended court battle. We drafted a bill last year that would narrow the amendment so that citizens filing well-founded legal challenges wouldn't face financial penalties. This amendment was defeated in a Senate committee last year, but we're working to get another shot in the upcoming session and looking for sponsors. We'd like sponsors from both parties if possible. We've also been raising this issue with legislators at county delegation meetings this fall. Meanwhile, there were some unfortunate additional setbacks for growth management in the 2021 session. Legislators passed a law to cap impact fee increases, which means local governments won't be able to recover all the costs of growth from developers. They passed a law to make it easier for property owners to seek compensation for limits on developing their parcels through the Burt-Harris Act. And this will make local governments less inclined to control growth. And they increased the size of so-called small-scale developments 5 times, from 10 acres to 50 acres in urban areas and 20 to 100 acres in rural areas. And this will exempt more developments from state and regional review for their impacts on the environment, transportation, and other important areas. I want to mention another law from this past session that we're attempting to turn from a negative into a positive. Legislators passed a measure requiring cities and counties to add a property rights element to their comprehensive plans. We saw this bill as an unneeded mandate on local governments because the US and Florida constitutions and Florida law already provide abundant protection for property rights. But once it passed, we recognized this law as an opportunity for cities and counties to adopt additional provisions at the state at the same time that would protect other property owners affected by development proposals. Our model element includes the mandatory provisions in the new law, but adds provisions to enhance citizen participation in the process of evaluating and approving development proposals. These include pre-application meetings between developers and citizens to work through concerns and conflict ahead of time, waiting periods for citizens and elected officials to analyze applications before they're voted on, and a supermajority requirement before changes to comp plans or rezonings can be approved. We believe every player is a winner with our model element. Citizens get a greater opportunity to provide meaningful input and shape development proposals in their communities. Developers learn of citizens' concerns ahead of time and have more time to resolve them. And local decision makers are presented with proposals that already reflect citizen input, and they have more time to consider them. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one very positive outcome from the 2021 legislative session. Legislators repealed the 2019 law that authorized the 330-mile MCORS network of toll roads through rural Florida. Had the project moved forward, it posed significant threats to natural lands, waterways, working farms, distinctive rural communities, and wildlife, including the Florida panther. It also would have diverted millions, if not billions of dollars away from more urgent transportation projects elsewhere in Florida, including in Alachua County. We were among groups that made these arguments after the MCORS law was passed. And legislators, bless them, listened. We continue to believe strongly that growth management demands a place on Tallahassee's agenda. As our state continues to grow, development pressure will only intensify, and our environment and quality of life will be at risk. If they aren't protected, our economy will suffer. We think the stakes are so high that growth management should be a priority for both parties. Here's what 1,000 Friends of Florida thinks is needed at the state level. Our leaders in Tallahassee need to reestablish a department-level land management agency, which would have the profile and clout to drive policy at the state level. They need to restore the ability of the department and citizens to enforce growth management laws. And the reestablished department should focus on incentives and investment strategies to promote more compact urban development. This includes mixed-use development, homes, shops, schools, and offices within close proximity, ideally within walking distance. It includes a range of housing choices to ensure affordability. It includes development designed for multiple transportation options. But urban and infill development should be sensitive to existing communities, respecting traditions and protecting significant historic and natural resources. At 1,000 Friends, we believe the cornerstone of a sound growth management strategy is a state economic plan that guides the investment of state funds for both infrastructure and conservation. The plan would identify lands on which urban development and redevelopment are appropriate and cost-effective for the next 50 years. The plan also would identify lands that must be protected from urban development to maintain them for agricultural use or water quality or wildlife diversity or recreational opportunities or some combination of those elements. Directing state spending on infrastructure to urban areas would promote economic growth and provide services where they are most needed. Directing other spending to conservation would protect and preserve Florida's rural environment, its rural heritage, and those elements of our economy that directly depend on natural lands and clean water, starting with agriculture and tourism. As much as we would like to see these changes on the state level, our goals for the 2022 session that starts in January are much more modest. For the reasons I've already explained in detail, we will continue to push for legislators to restore citizens' rights to challenge development orders without risking financial ruin. We also would like to see legislators create incentives for local governments to maintain remote options for citizen participation in public meetings, especially planning meetings. Options like we're all using right at this minute. Many citizens can't leave home to go to the council chambers or the courthouse for meetings during the workday or at night when they have family obligations. It shouldn't take a pandemic to give them alternatives, remote alternatives. We'd like to see legislators provide another strong year of funding for land conservation, no matter how much money Congress may provide. They have an obligation to do so under Amendment 1, passed 3-1 by voters in 2014. We'd like to see them fully implement the recommendations of the governor's Blue-Green Algae Task Force. We'd like to see more funding for water quality improvements and monitoring, and more measures to promote water conservation. We'd like to see another strong year of funding for programs to prepare for climate change. And we'd like to see more funding for alternatives to highways. Meanwhile, local leaders don't have to wait on action from Tallahassee. They are still the most important stewards of the environment and quality of life in this county and in every county in Florida. The decisions they make on growth and development will largely determine the county's future. To do your part as citizens and advisors to local government, you can stay engaged, help shape and participate in critical planning processes, attend hearings, meet with elected officials and staff, talk with your neighbors, share your knowledge on why planning matters. And we ask that you support us in our efforts to build better communities and save special places in Florida. Please help us continue to engage with leaders in the Capitol, commission and council rooms and courthouses throughout our state. Help us keep informing and empowering citizens to exercise their right to have a say in the future of their communities and their state. Help us protect the things we treasure about Florida, whether it's our waterways, our natural lands, our hometowns, our diverse cultural traditions, or our wildlife. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak tonight, and I look forward to any questions anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a lot of food for thought. So I guess we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. I don't know, Mark, if individuals have control over their mics or if you want to manage that.
By the way, for everyone, under the reactions button down at the bottom, there is an option for raising and lowering your hand for asking questions.
David, go ahead. You got a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. I'll ask one, and then at the end of other people's questions, I'll ask the second one if there's time left. I attended a meeting last night, which with Wesley Smith argued that laws that would protect the environment by granting rights to them over private property rights will result in economic collapse. He believes that the development of wetlands and swamps need to be left to the decisions by private businesses to decide if we are to thrive economically. What's your opinion on that?
I think the failure to manage growth and the failure to protect the environment is about the worst thing we can do here in Florida. There are many people, I think, starting with Governor Askew, who said that in Florida, the environment, a healthy environment and a healthy economy are inextricably linked. If we destroy our wetlands, if we pave over our natural lands, we are going to undermine the strength, the foundation, the very foundation of our economy. We need to do more to protect our natural lands, our wetlands, our wildlife. There's plenty of land in Florida that is suitable for development, that we don't have to go into areas that are unsuitable for development and not serviced by infrastructure. I would strongly disagree with the premise of what you heard last night.
I have a follow-up comment, and that's that in Florida, the private property rights actually give private property holders more power than regulators to control what happens to our environment. And so we don't really currently have much control over that. Do you agree that that's true or false?
You know, I'm not a lawyer, and I think private property rights are open to the extent of them, are open to interpretation. Part of the point of the model property rights element that I included in my presentation is that property rights don't end with the person seeking to develop or somehow or come up with some new use for his or her property. They also extend to affected people, and there's plenty of case law to reinforce that. People who are affected by the choices that they may seek for their property. And that's the whole basis of growth management, is that there are resources that are of regional and state importance that that need to be protected, and that so it goes. Property rights go well beyond the individual who's seeking to develop his or her own property.
Thank you.
Melissa?
Hi, Paul. I just want to start by saying thank you. This was an incredible presentation, and I know how talented and busy you and all of your staff are, and what important and nuanced work you do in the state. So thank you for your time and for sharing so much with us tonight. I did have a question, kind of a combined thought between your upcoming legislative priorities, looking at increasing community resilience on the coast in the face of sea level change and climate change, and what the data was showing in the 2070 report, and just if there's any consideration. I know it's likely funding dependent, but to do another look at what 2070 could look like, really tying in kind of some of the climate change and sea level rise scenarios and the impacts that would have on coastal communities.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. I'm so glad you asked that question. First of all, I'm busy, but this is a great opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity. Sorry, I had the technical issue with how my screen was shared. But getting to your question, we are actually working with the University of Florida right now, with GIS experts at the University of Florida, to add an additional layer to the analysis that we did with the 2016 water and land use reports that will assess the impact of sea level rise on population migration, on land use, and on agriculture specifically. And part of the reason we're looking at agriculture specifically is a lot of our agricultural lands are going to be under particular stress when people start relocating from coastal areas toward the inland. It's going to be an inevitable result of sea level rise. And the other challenges that climate change presents to people who are now on the coast, not only sea level rise, but stronger storms, more frequent flooding. So we did not do that in 2016, but we are in the process of doing that now. We hope to unveil a sea level 2070 report early in 2022, and it will definitely have an impact and probably intensify some of the things that some of our findings from the Water 2070 and Florida 2070 reports. And it will really underscore the importance of the critical importance of planning properly for what's ahead of us here in Florida.
Thank you. That's really exciting. I'm definitely going to be looking forward to that report. And as far as your presentation went, I could see your slides just fine. They looked good on my screen. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think everybody could see them just fine. I know I could as well. Go ahead, Nancy, you have a question?
Yes, hi, Nancy Darren, thank you. And thank you, Paul, very much. I got involved with Thousand Friends down in Martin County when Nate was still very involved. So yeah, the heartbreak of 2011 was just devastating and ongoing. So a couple of questions, and I'll follow up because Melissa asked the question I had in mind. Was sea level rise and those effects, but also heat issues, that whether or not, especially if we're looking at urban infill and good planning that way, is that no matter what, heat issues and microbursts and things like that, I think are going to be ever more problematic. So I'm glad to know you're re-examining or adding layers to these maps. And I wondered if you had also a shorter time frame, because I think out that far, you know, you're doing this for a purpose. I understand that, and it's, in one sense, I hate to say it, it's a waste of time, because 10 years from now, I think the world is going to be a very different place. But anyway, the whole heat island, the urban heat issues, and are we starting to ask, are you finding ways to ask about carrying capacity of a place? Not just that, oh, we're going to keep growing, because there are points where you are in a declining benefit, and you start to stress every single system. Nothing can keep up anymore. So are those questions you're exploring, how we can ask? And then is there a shorter time frame? I mean, I have lots.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I'll just, in conjunction with all of it, are there any or enough allies in the legislature? Because I'm so depressed by our legislature. It seems so hopeless. They just do stuff. Right. Thank you.
Sure, I'll try to address those in order. First of all, you are certainly not the first person who has pointed out that 2070 is a long time from now. A lot of people who have come up to me do it in a much less delicate way. They say 2070, I'll be dead by then. But we are hoping, it's a matter of funding, but we are hoping that in the 2070 report, because it's more work, but we are hoping that the Sea Level 2070 report to have some interim analysis for exactly that reason, because you know, the climate is changing I think at a faster rate than a lot of people realize. Yeah, I'm hopeful that we won't have to go all the way out to 2070. Although I would say that good planning for 2070 starts today. So no matter what we come up with for this next report, I think that there is an urgency on it to act immediately. Now, as far as the carrying capacity goes, I think that's something that lots of people are thinking about. I think that's a really sophisticated and complex sophisticated and complex undertaking for the Florida Peninsula, and it's not something that is on our to-do list. That doesn't mean that it's not something important. I will say that nobody stopped me when I moved down here in 2001, and there is an issue with trying to close the gate behind us on migration in Florida. But I agree that the more our population grows, the more the challenges we face in protecting our environment. The only place so far that I know that has a carrying capacity established is the Keys, but it may be something we have to start thinking about for the rest of the state. And I'm not sure, Nancy, did you have another question that I may have missed something else that you asked?
Yeah, sorry, I kind of blathered with a lot of things, so I appreciate all your answers. Yes, I was in the current legislature because it feels so bleak. Yeah. Are there allies, or are there? I always appreciate your legislative priorities and all. What are the best ways right now that we can go about it? And are there allies that we can lift up and strengthen in the legislature?
It is a very, be diplomatic, it is a very challenging environment in the legislature on growth management. And I think the leadership is more susceptible to economic arguments than environmental arguments. Now, I've already argued that I think economic arguments are almost synonymous with environmental arguments. But if you hit people in the wallets, they seem more sensitive to those arguments. So, the one bright spot that I highlighted from the last session, the repeal of the M-Course toll road network, which would have had all kinds of negative environmental consequences, and might have been, the equivalent of the things that I talked about that Nat Reed stopped, the jet port in the Everglades and the Cross Florida Barge Canal might have been on that scale. I think the reason why they repealed it was because they realized that it was unaffordable, and they were more susceptible to that argument than the environmental arguments that folks have been making. But I think really the best, if you look at history, when we've made the most progress on growth management and enlightened environmental policy, it has started with leadership right from the top. I'm thinking of Governor Askew and Governor Grant, and to some extent, Governor Childs. But even Governor Bush was responsible for the Florida Forever program, which has saved hundreds of thousands of acres of environmental land. So the most hope we have is to start from the top, and legislators tend to follow the lead of the governor.
George, you had a question? You need to unmute yourself, George.
Sorry. It appears you answered part of my question with the last person asking about sustainable, the potential sustainability. If you project 100 or 150 years out, has anyone made projections that far? And if you do, wouldn't you expect the equivalent of the Mongolian horde to overwhelm Florida, even given the best intentions? And even if you practice best management, I agree with what you say, I like what you say, but I'm afraid that, as is the case with Orlando and other cities, when politicians tried to do the right thing, ended up in reflection years later saying there was nothing that could have resisted the overwhelming force of sheer numbers of people. And that concerns me. Is there anything that, has anyone done long-term projections where the sheer numbers of people will be enormous?
Yeah, I have not seen projections that go beyond the 50-year time frame that we've done with the University of Florida. I do think it's almost like a Malthusian theory, but I think at a certain point, if the population degrades our environment and our resources, our water supply, I think people will stop coming here. Now, I don't want that to happen. I think it would probably be better for us long term if the growth were not quite so steep. But I'd rather not see it slow down because we've fouled our nest down here. But I don't know what we can do to stop people from coming here. I've never been aware of a state right. that's been able to do that.
Also, given the current state of politics in Florida, with the legislatures being so overwhelmingly Republican and so seemingly against real environmental, they don't make the connection between the economy and the environment. At least they don't talk about it in front of their gerrymandered constituents. I don't know if I'm making that clear, but they are simply taking an easy way to guarantee their continued position of power and patronize or support those who give them money for their campaigns. And it just seems like a real quagmire.
Well, I guess I wouldn't disagree completely, but I would point out there are, exceptions. They did put some, now they were lucky enough to have a bunch of money dumped on them by Congress under the rescue plan, but they did dedicate more funding to land conservation in this past session than they had in recent years. Now they should be doing that every year. The pace of land conservation has to pick up, or else critical environmental acreage is going to be lost forever to development. But they did they did put up some money, more money than in the past for land conservation. They seem to be more comfortable with that kind of blunt approach to growth management than actually empowering citizens and local governments to manage growth within cities and counties. But you know, the part of it, it's kind of an institutional problem that goes to how campaigns are financed. You know, in your average environmental advocate can't write a check as big as your average advocate for unrestrained growth, unfortunately.
So I think we're, you know, a little bit over time, and I want to respect Paul's time. So we're going to wrap up. We did have one person, and I think this might be a good way to close off everything. Masuma in the chat says, you know, she's just wondering how individuals can get involved aside from donations. And if there's any other organizations that you would point folks to, and then maybe just remind everybody of how they can stay engaged with your organization, 1,000 Friends of Florida.
Well, we are a, you know, we cover the entire, or do our best to cover the entire state, but we're 6 people, and so we're stretched kind of thin. But in just about every community throughout Florida, there are good, strong environmental advocacy organizations who have good volunteer networks. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow night for the Loxahatchee chapter of the Sierra Club in Palm Beach County. And there, you know, there are organizations like that have the people and the bandwidth to get involved in local development controversies that I think you can find in just about every community in Florida. And we work with them. We enjoy partnering with them. One of the ways you can stay engaged with us is to visit our website regularly. That's 1000fof.org. We monitor legislation. We have our webinars once a month on planning and conservation topics. And there's just a lot of information archived there that is, I think, useful. And you know, we're all about providing information to people so they can be more effective in participating in planning debates in their own communities. And we encourage you to visit our website, visit our social media platforms, and take advantage of that information.
Thank you so much, Paul. Excellent talk. And thank you everybody for coming. And this will be posted on Facebook if anybody wants to rewatch or share it with anyone that they know. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Excellent work.
Thank you, Paul.